Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
The nation's most sweeping cap-and-trade program for reducing greenhouse gas emissions is approved in California. Tensions in Richmond escalate over gang activity after a violent outburst in City Hall. Democratic politicians reveal how deep their losses are in the alleged funds scandal involving campaign treasurer Kindy Durkee. Also, a conversation with PBS NewsHour anchor Jim Lehrer about his experiences as a presidential debate moderator.
2 minutes, and then I'll decide whether we go on.
Coming up next. Good evening. I'm Joshua Johnson of KQED News, sitting in for Belva Davis. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me this week on our news panel are Hannah Dreyer, Contra Costa Times Richmond reporter, Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle political writer, and Craig Miller, KQED's Climate Watch senior editor. Welcome, everyone. Craig, let's start with you. Cap and trade. The plans were finally laid this week to try to help take 427 million metric tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and this is a big part of that plan. How is it supposed to work?
We're going to find out whether it's going to work. Make no mistake about it, this is a bit of a gamble. There's been nothing quite like this anywhere in the country. There's something kind of like it in the Northeast that only applies to electrical power plants. Europe, of course, has been doing it, but this is a sweeping, as you describe it, comprehensive plan, 600 facilities just in the first year alone, and then it builds from there, and complicated, and still very much a work in progress. As far as we've come, more than 4 years, built more than 1,000, they say, stakeholder meetings, tweaking this thing and fine-tuning it. There's still a lot to kind of figure out exactly about how this will work.
It sounds like the general idea is to kind of commoditize carbon, to put a price on it so companies are disincentivized from using it. In fact, one figure I read said that it might be $36 per ton of carbon dioxide. How is the price factor supposed to work?
So the idea is that the state comes in and they say, okay, all you guys who are covered by the program, here's your cap. No more carbon into the atmosphere than this much. They basically figure out about what we're going to do this year, and then they knock 2% off that, and they say, here's the first cap, and then it's going to start ratcheting down between now and 2012. Now, if you have trouble meeting that, if you can reduce your emissions either by tweaking your facilities, retrofitting your refinery or whatever it is, or if you can't do that, you can buy the permissions, to emit, carbon over your cap. But it's like a game of Monopoly, basically. You get that little pile of paper at the beginning, and you can trade it, with other players in the game.
Craig, I mean, this has been hailed as the most comprehensive system anywhere in the country. It's also been criticized, as you know, by conservatives, by business who say this is going to mean electricity is more expensive. How does it affect the average consumer out there, those of us in our day-to-day lives? Will it?
Again, there's no real certainty around that, but it is possible that it will have an effect on your electric rates and your water rates, too. Water districts are not happy about the fact that they're covered by this, and they're going to have to pay for their emissions at some point, too. It will probably, most, I think, credible studies that came out during remember the big Prop 23 fight when the industry came in and tried to kill this whole thing at the ballot box. I think most of the credible studies that came out during that time indicated it would not be the wholesale job killer that, say, the oil industry has said it will be. It will kill some jobs, but it will probably also create a lot of new jobs as well.
And during the Prop 23 debate, voters came in and said that they wanted this program, or at least they didn't want to kill it. But in Congress, a similar program failed last year. Why is this happening in California? Why has this been able to become a reality here?
Well, this goes back to the gambling part. This is another roll of the dice, is that California is, in a sense, going it alone with this, and that's risky. We weren't supposed to. There was supposed to be a thing called the Western Climate Initiative with a half a dozen western states and some Canadian provinces all going in and creating this big market. And what we ended up with was a couple of Canadian provinces, no states. And so now California is doing this, and this is part of the worry among businesses. Okay, what happens when I run my glass factory in California and I got to pay for these carbon emissions, but the guy in Nevada doesn't? Doesn't that business just go there? Well, we're going to find out.
There's also the matter of the timeline for this. I mean, part of the enforcement for this cap and trade plan was supposed to kick in this coming year. Now it's been pushed back a year. There have been lawsuits from environmental justice groups who say that, the California's Air Resources Board, which is responsible for kind of managing this, didn't consider enough alternatives. They didn't quite do this right. I wonder how much of a moving target these dates may end up becoming, whether we end up pushing our way to 2020 or maybe pushing beyond 2020.
Well, it was that lawsuit, I think, that was largely responsible for the compliance being pushed back the 1 year to 2013. I don't know of any big lawsuits on the horizon. They pretty much complied with that one, even though it's still under appeal. But there's still a lot of room for tweakage in the regulations themselves, not only between now and when it goes into effect, but even in the years after it goes into effect and is phased in. They say they're going to continue this dialogue with all of the stakeholders and use what they call adaptive management, to tweak the program as they go.
I like that term, tweakage. Yeah, very accurate.
What about with the economic situation the way it is? You mentioned other states have not signed on to this. I mean, is there a potential here for who knows what if the economy continues to go south? How does this affect business out there? You mentioned the competitive nature of business and the fact that some of them may go across the border to other states to do business.
And if I could tag on to that, is because we're going to have to switch segments in a minute. Okay. Is the state ready for that? Yeah. Are they prepared for that?
The biggest concern is this idea of leakage. That's what they call it. It's the term the wonks use about the jobs, going elsewhere when this happens. And there's also this idea of a haircut. Very quickly, I'll try to do this. That some facilities, there are benchmarks established, and if you run a facility that's not quite up to snuff in terms of its carbon intensity, like there's a refinery up here in Rodeo, for example, run by ConocoPhillips, it's going to have to pay more. It's going to have to pay for some of those allowances right off the bat, whereas some of its competitors may not have to, and those companies are worried about that too. But again, really hard to say exactly what the effects are going to be.
Tweakage and leakage.
Tweakage and leakage.
Love it. Thank you, Craig. Hannah Dreyer, the story about what's come out of Richmond City Hall just captivated me this week. This fight that broke out and the ongoing tensions between different parts of city government in trying to control gang violence that kind of butted heads last Friday. We're a week hence from that. Tell us what happened, first of all.
Well, the problem is we don't know exactly what happened. We know that a group of men came into City Hall last Friday to participate in a city anti-violence program and got into a knockdown, drag-out brawl, threw around furniture, covered the walls and floor with blood. When the police came and they essentially followed a trail of blood to the city anti-violence offices, nobody would talk to them. Staff wouldn't talk to them, and the gang members who were still there wouldn't talk to them, wouldn't tell them who was there or what had happened.
And there's a visual, by the way, the trail of blood leading to the anti-violence office.
Exactly. And the other visual that stood out to me was this week's City Hall meeting, because several of them went up and the city leaders said, you have got to cooperate. And even the staff from this Office of Neighborhood Safety, as a block, said, we won't, because it'll ruin our efforts.
Right. Well, the way that this office works, it's somewhat unconventional. The idea is that instead of just sending police out to the street to crack heads, they're getting community members, people who were on the streets themselves when they were younger, to go out and form relationships with people who are in gangs or might well be in gangs. And the idea there is that you build trust with them, and the people who work in the community in the anti-violence program say that they can't talk about these people. They can't tell the police what they did because it'll erode the trust, which is the point of the program.
There's so many ironies in the stories that you've written on this, and I have to say, you wrote that the men who were fighting were there to collect checks from a city-administered life skills training fellowship, checks from $350 to $1,000. In an era of financial, fiscal concern, doesn't this give a black eye to every kind of program? I mean, how do you justify a program where you're throwing out checks to guys who are, trying to kill each other?
Yeah.
What's the future of this kind of program? And doesn't this give a black eye to other programs like this all around the Bay Area?
Well, this is a program in Richmond that serves about 40 young people, men 20 to 25. and gives them checks each month for engaging in life skills training. So that could mean an anti-violence course or getting your GED. And these men also have to not use guns, not engage in gun violence. And what the people who run the program are saying is that it could have been much worse. These men could have used guns. Instead, they just maybe broke somebody's nose, spilled some blood.
So they're saying there's like the glass half full here.
Right. They're learning some life skills. They're following this program.
But here's what kills me about
to make a decision, though, right?
Exactly.
About how to go forward with this. Right?
And here's what kills me about this, is that these guys, I mean, this office was on the 3rd floor of City Hall. There were supposedly 10 of these guys. Someone else in that building saw what happened. So it's not just the staff from this office, but it's the people in City Hall and near City Hall and around the community who seem to be kind of, you know, when I was growing up, we called it no snitching. This whole idea of fear of speaking up, not just because you're complicit, but because you become a target. And if they could do this in Richmond City Hall, what are they going to do to me, miles from City Hall, if the police weren't even there when the fight happened?
But that's another irony, because these are the same people, as you've written about, who always urge the local community to cooperate with the cops, correct?
Exactly, and that's what's gotten a lot of people in town absolutely livid, that for years people have been coming into communities and saying you need to talk to the police, you need to tell people what you see. Richmond's been plagued with gang crime for years. Just this summer, 13 people were killed in the space of 2 months. And so there's been a huge effort to get people to work with the police. And now you have this office where they didn't witness a homicide, they witnessed a brawl, and they're not coming forward. And some of the people who work in the office are saying, well, it could put their lives at risk on the street.
So then what happens now?
That's what I was referring to before when I said somebody's going to have to determine where we're going to draw that line, beyond which you really got to tell somebody what happened.
Right,
Yeah.
and what surprised us is that it's actually city policy that the people who work in this anti-violence program don't have to talk to the police. It's built into the program. Wow. These people are supposed to win the confidence of people on the streets. If need be, their boss can talk to the police.
You see that holding up, though?
Well, you know, as soon as these people witness a crime in an obvious way, everybody's looking at that policy. And now city leaders are talking about changing it, and there's going to be an independent investigation.
Who runs ONS, this Office of Neighborhood Safety?
The director is a man called Devon Bogan, and above him is the city manager, and above them, you know,
so the city manager
council
is ultimately the one who's got to answer the council, explain what happened, and try to proffer some solutions to this.
Yeah, and I mean, the city manager is doing the best he can. My understanding is that he doesn't have the whole story of what happened during this fight either. But he is in the process of reevaluating how this program is run. He's bringing in an outside party to look at it. The council's going to be looking at it as well. But these kind of programs are very popular. The city of Richmond is desperate to stop crime. They've tried cracking heads. So I think there's still a lot of support among city leaders for a program of this type.
Gotcha. And I look forward to seeing what comes out of this and the whole change and the transition that takes place. Thank you, Hannah. Appreciate it. Carla Marinucci.
Yes.
Politics.
Yes.
Not just politics, but math and accounting and money. A lot of money missing. Kindy Durkee, that case finally started moving forward this week. There was supposed to be a hearing this week,
That's
but
right,
pushed
there
back
was.
to December. What happened?
You know, an amazing story, Joshua. I got to say, I mean, this is a case, not exactly Bernie Madoff, but we're talking about a woman who for 20 years has really been a fixture in California political campaigns. And now the facts are starting to come out. Some people are saying as much as $25 million could be involved in this whole case. We heard at FPPC hearing, Dianne Feinstein kind of got a picture of what her campaign is missing. We're talking about almost $5 million from Senator Feinstein's campaign alone, and a whole bunch of other California politicians, most of them Democrats, who are missing hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're talking about Linda Sanchez, Loretta Sanchez, to the tune of $300,000 or more. How did this happen? You know, a lot of people are saying this is a woman who worked for 20 years in California politics. And it really, the fact is, there were signs that things were off with Kindy Durkee, and there were, I think, warning signs all the way along.
Now, this is a woman who had been trusted by hundreds of campaigns and organizations to basically do their books. But the thing that kind of struck me, go ahead, you say it, because it's the craziest part of the whole story.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, she had $200,000, she'd been hit with $200,000 in fines going back several years. 2 years ago, we at the Chronicle wrote a story about her. She was involved as the treasurer of a phony Californians for Obama campaign. She was purporting to have events with big stars like Eartha Kitt, cruises. Some poor people, we found poor people in cities like Compton that had put up as much as $2,000 to attend these phony events. We reported on it. A couple of months later, we found her involved in a phony inaugural event where big legislators were supposed to show up who were not involved. So there were signs that something was off here between the fines and the phony campaigns.
Plus, she wasn't even a licensed accountant, as I understand it.
That's another aspect of this. I mean, I think that one of the interesting things is at a time when a lot of people are calling for cutbacks in government oversight and regulation, we can't
Fiscal
afford
responsibility.
fiscal
Right.
responsibility. Who was it that found this case? Was the Fair Political Practices Commission, really tracked it down? Their budget has been slashed. That's the group that is involved in oversight of political campaigns. They're way overworked, these folks in Sacramento.
Which brings up the question of the people that she was working for. To what extent is this like the Enron CEO saying, well, I have no idea what goes on in my own company, and I'm not responsible for it.
Yeah, I mean, what we've heard is, look, there are only in California about 5 or 6 people in the state who apparently can understand the complex campaign finance law. Now, I kind of find that hard to believe, but that's what the politicians are telling us, that these rules and regulations are so complicated that they really only a few people get trusted with them. That's why so many people apparently went to this woman and opened their books and their checkbooks to her in a way that is now proving to be just completely insane.
And how bad does that look for these elected officials who are supposed to be minding the public till?
You know, I think, again, that's a very good question. This is not good that there are so many Democrats involved here, and it has given the Republicans the ammunition to say, these are the people that are watching your tax dollars. Apparently they weren't watching their own. I think it could be a campaign issue, absolutely.
I want to talk about Michelle Bachmann in town, but before we do that, I want to ask quickly. Average people who donated to these campaigns, average organizations that Kendi Durkee was involved with, how does this affect everyone else?
I don't think it does. I mean, the question is, can they now donate again to these campaigns? Look, a lot of these people who wrote big checks will write again campaigns. So I don't think for average people, it's the campaign coffers that are most at risk there.
Gotcha. Quickly, Michelle Bachmann, she was in town. I know you were stunned that there was nary a protester, no opponents, nobody threw glitter on her.
No, but nothing.
Everything was peace and love.
Yeah, and we expected, speaking of the Commonwealth Club, she had a standing room only crowd there, and it was a love fest, I have to say. This just shows to me her campaign, in many ways, it may be a footnote in the Republican presidential. The fact that she didn't attract any protesters in San Francisco was amazing to me.
Briefly, because we're almost out of time on this segment, it seems like the whole field, Barack Obama's going to be back, President Obama's going to be back this week, I believe it is.
That's right, on Tuesday, yes.
Exactly. The GOP has been campaigning up and down California. They're really not in the state for fans. They're really in the state for money right now, clearly.
This is the love for California gives them. You're absolutely right. Obama's back. This is 1 month since he's last been here. Rick Perry is coming back. They're all coming back. California's the ATM for all these campaigns. And even for Michelle Bachmann, apparently she did a couple of fundraisers in San Francisco while she was here. So
must be nice. Carla Marinucci of the San Francisco Chronicle, Hannah Dreyer of the Bay Area News Group, and Craig Miller of KQED. Thank you. Longtime PBS NewsHour anchor Jim Lehrer has moderated more presidential debates than anyone else. He details his experiences in his new book, Tension City. Belva Davis spoke with him earlier this week.
Jim, you have moderated 11 presidential debates, one of them a vice presidential debate. How did you become the favorite moderator of these kinds of forums?
Well, I would love to be able to sit here and tell you that it's because of my brilliance and my whatever. The practical reason is that it's the nature of what we do at the NewsHour, and the way we talk to people and interview people and run discussions. I think it was less about me than it was about the way we do things, and also it came down to a practical matter a few times when representatives of the candidates and the debate committee, they couldn't agree on anybody else. So I would like to think it's all about me, but it isn't.
At one season, you did all of the debates.
That's right. That's right.
Why?
Well, the first time that happened, they agreed on my doing the first one. They asked me to do it. This was in '96, Bob Dole and Bill Clinton. And I agreed to do it. And then they apparently went on talking, and they couldn't agree on who was going to do the other two debates. So finally these guys started yelling at each other, and finally they said, well, look, we can agree on, this is what I was told later, we can agree on Lehrer. Let's see if he'll do all three of them. We can go to bed at night and get this thing over with. So they called me and asked me if I would do them. I said, sure. So that was it.
Well, your book is called Tension City, so that meant that was 3 times in that season that you could go through this. There's a favorite story that you tell in the book about the first President Bush and his advice or his comments about what's involved in doing one of these debates.
Yeah, well, the title comes from that.
Tension City.
I asked him, some great penetrating question like, what were they like, Mr. President? And he said, all those big time things, Jim, they were Tension City. And I had a working title in the book for 2.5 years. It was called Moderator. And the editor finally called me. The book was all done, ready to go. And the editor called me and said, we're not sure Moderator is a great title. And I said, well, I was very defensive about it. And I said, well, that is the title. And he said, well, let me ask you a question, Jim. Would you buy a book with the title Moderator? And okay, I'll think about it. And I remembered what George H.W. Bush had told me, because I was able to interview just about all of the candidates for president and vice president who had done these televised debates, and I was able to talk to them about their experiences. And I remembered that line from George H.W. Bush. He hated the debates. He just, in fact, I later asked him in that same interview, post-debate interview, should they be required? A required part of the political process. He said no, should be up to the candidates. If it was up to a candidate, if a candidate thought it would be helpful, yes. If a candidate thought it would be harmful, no. It should be up to the candidates alone, and only the candidates decide whether they're going to be debates or not.
Well, a good line from President Bush, but you had one that really resonated with me, and that was all to do with a knife.
Oh yeah. Well, my comparison was moderating one of those debates is like walking down the blade of a very sharp knife, and you take one false step and you get cut, you get hurt. And I always felt that way. And it's not just the moderator, it's for everybody involved. The stakes are really, really high. And for the candidates and their handlers as well as the moderator, obviously.
2 minutes, 2 minutes.
President Bush, too, was criticized for looking at his watch. Why was that such a big deal?
Well, it's an interesting question, Belva, because Bill Clinton, in fact, had a better answer than anybody to that. I asked him, why did that matter? Because he said, because it fulfilled a perception of President Bush. Somehow he was disconnected from the people. Remember, there had been a story that he didn't know how to work a checkout counter at a grocery store. He was above all this sort of stuff, and that the whole process kind of bored him and all that. And looking at the watch, according to as Bill Clinton said, if Clinton had looked at his watch, or if Ross Perot, who was the other candidate who was in that debate, if either one of them had looked at their watch, nobody would have paid any attention to it. But because it was George H.W. Bush, and there was already this perception about it, this seemed to feed the perception, and that's why it hurt.
Were there moments ever when you were unsure you were going to pull it off? I know there's one chapter where you write about sitting there looking at your prompter copy, your teleprompter copy, where you get what you have to say, and there was nothing there.
That's right. They had covered it with a piece of black cloth. So the background shot at the beginning, when the candidates walked in, you wouldn't see the prompter, because the camera came through a slit. And I looked up to say good evening, and they were supposed to pull the sheet away, and they hadn't pulled it away, so all I saw was black.
Your opinions of debate, do they serve a purpose? Do they really help the public make a good decision?
Absolutely, they do. It's the only time, Belva, during a presidential campaign where the same candidates are on the same stage at the same time talking about something that matters. And you get to take the measure of the person, whether you're for them or against them, whether you like their views on a particular issue or not. You can have an impression information, they kind of judge the temperament of these people, judge whether or not you could see this person sitting at a desk at the Oval Office, making a decision about another Katrina situation or another 9/11 situation, or sending Americans to war.
Before we close down, you've been making some changes. You've changed the news hour. You're there on Fridays now. What's the next evolution?
Well, it's probably going to be more of the same. I'm very keen on doing what I can off camera to try to make sure that public broadcasting remains vital in the serious news and public affairs area, not only nationally with the news hour, but locally as well. I think that what we're doing in the news hour should be done locally in every public television station in the country. I think journalism needs some help, and these newspapers are hurting, and public broadcasting needs to step up to the plate and do its part. We're prepared to do it. It's our mission, and we've got to do it.
Okay, Jim Lehrer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Many thanks to all of our guests for joining us this week. Please visit kqed.org/thisweek for our program archive, to subscribe to our newsletter and podcast, and to share your thoughts about the show. You can also learn more about cap and trade from Craig Miller at our Climate Watch blog. That's kqed.org/climatewatch. We leave you tonight with a look at an earthquake simulator for the Great California Shakeout. The timing, oddly enough, was perfect, since a pair of magnitude 4 temblors actually hit Berkeley on the day of the drill. I'm Joshua Johnson of KQED News. Belva Davis will be back next week. Thank you for watching. Good night.
I'm going to hold on, I'm going to duck and cover.